Recently, one of my friends expressed to me concern about one of my YouTube videos, and he wasn't concerned about the topic being incorrect. The reason why he was concerned is because it had to do with sensitive issues that are a hot button topic right now in the Egyptian church. And he was legitimately worried that my video might cause discontent, or vitriol, or discord, or unnecessary division. And I didn't know that this was a thing at all, because I don't use many of the social medias that are popular over in Egypt. Not only is that the case, I don't engage in content in Arabic because I'm really bad at Arabic. I'm okay, but I can't really engage with content, especially something as dense as theology content in Arabic. And so this got me thinking, what do we do when church leaders conflict with one another or contradict one another? What happens when there is this discord where one church leader might say one thing and another might say another thing, and they both rally their own people, and then there's this civil war? What then? What do we do? And in today's video, I'm going to explore four main things. The first is I'm going to talk about how church division isn't new. This is something that's existed really since the beginning of the church, and what we can learn from history. Second thing I'm going to talk about is how modern technology, especially social media, really pour gas on this fire and make things way worse. The third thing I'm going to discuss are practical ways to remain faithful when things are divisive. And then lastly, I'm going to touch on finding peace when the people we look to guidance for disagree. And so first, let's talk about the history. Church history is littered with examples where church leaders kind of went up against each other. One obvious example is Saint Athanasius against Arius. And Athanasius was exiled 4 or 5 times before eventually history vindicated him. In Latin, Saint Athanasius is often referred to as Athanasius contra mundum, which means Athanasius against the world. You also have the conflict with Cyril and Nestorius. This conflict, during its time, created riots, even violent riots and protests. And so this was an issue that was escalating up to that point. You also had the issue with iconoclasm later on in church history, where people were fighting on whether or not it's appropriate for there to be icons in churches, and Christians were murdered over this. Lastly, you have the Great Schism of 1054. This was the huge rift that separated the East from the West, and schisms have been happening since then, and schisms were happening before then. And so these challenges continue to happen today. For example, in the Eastern Orthodox Church, you have the issue with Ukraine, where Moscow and Constantinople are fighting over who is responsible or should be in charge of shepherding Ukraine. You also had Vatican tensions between Pope Francis and some of the cardinals regarding things like divorced Catholics, and Francis, before his death recently, created a lot of these issues, and there was a lot of discourse and discontent amongst him and his cardinals and his bishops. And then in my own tradition, you have a little bit of this tug of war, push and pull, between the late Pope Shenouda III and one of our mystics, contemporary mystics, Father Matthew the Poor. And people pick sides, and this guy was right, and that guy was right. Okay. And so this is something that's always happened, and it's still continuing to happen. And social media makes this so much worse because, first of all, communication is stripped down to its absolute bare minimum essentials. Body language is usually gone. That's one nice thing about videos like this. At least you can see my body language, hear my tone. But usually, if it's something like Twitter or Facebook, where you have this block of text, you can't really pick up on these nuances. You're missing things like tone. There's so much of communication that gets stripped out on social media. And not only that, but social media hates nuance. It can't stand nuance. Where these complex theological discussions really require nuance. And so that's when you really see this problem occur, when these conversations require you to be really detailed and micro-specific about certain details and terminology and words. And a lot of that nuance is lost on social media. And so these topics get reduced to these provocative headlines and inflammatory sound bites. And the algorithms on top of all of that, on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, they exploit so many of our natural human tendencies, and they make them work against us. We have, for example, something called appeal to authority, where humans have this natural tendency to want to look up to the experts. That's why people value things like having PhD in your title, or Deacon so-and-so, for example, or Pope so-and-so, or Dr. so-and-so. We kind of have this tendency to look up to, respect, and find influential these authorities or these experts. Not only that, but we are such inherently tribal creatures, us versus them, me versus you, this family feud, Mac versus PC. This is the way that humans tend to see the world, move through the world, and get passionate over those sorts of things. And so, since humans are that way, if someone posts something that's tribal or that has one of these appeals to authority, people latch onto it. And then that post gets clicks and likes and shares and engagement. And for whoever posted that, they get dopamine reward. Wow, look at me, I'm getting so much attention. I'm so special. Look at me, I'm so important. Wow. And so then it rewards them for doing this. And so then they do it even more. So we're kind of cooked. But not all hope is lost. And many saints who might have disagreed with each other in waking life while they were alive, they're probably in heaven now, chilling with each other, united, having a good time. And so what do we do about it? What should we do about this situation? This is a little bit of a problem. It exists in all of the traditions. It exists in my tradition, Eastern Orthodox tradition, Catholicism. Protestantism is obviously splintered in 1,000 different ways. One of the first things we can do to kind of remedy this is we should first seek to understand, then to be understood. This alone would solve so many issues. If we try to understand where the other person is coming from before we expect them to see where we're coming from, we could solve a lot of problems. And we judge ourselves by our best intentions, and we judge others based on their actions, which is not fair, but that's the normal human tendency. But if we can kind of see where the other person's coming from, we could be a little bit more charitable, a little bit more graceful in conversation. And we need to maintain an understanding of how regarded we all are, and how we all have a little bit of tism inside of us, just a little bit of that. What am I talking about, in case you don't know what I'm talking about? None of us know everything, okay? We're all limited in knowledge. We all have so many things we don't understand. Theology itself has kind of become more defined and revealed to us over time. I'll talk about that a little bit later in the video. And so, to have a lot of pride in our knowledge when we really don't know much about God at all it's kind of silly. There's this term in theology. It's called apothetic theology. What does apothetic mean? It means by negation. So apathetic theology means that we learn about God by talking about and thinking about what God isn't. Because we know so much more. Let me rephrase. We know that we don't know way more about God than we do know. Okay, follow me. So we know that we know so little about God, and there's so much we don't know about God, that sometimes it's more beneficial and useful to talk about what God isn't. because it reveals more of our awe and our fear of the infinite God, of whom we know such little about. And when we're in doubt about what to do, love is never the wrong answer. I'm not saying tolerance. I'm not saying turning, a blind eye to something that is clearly incorrect. I'm talking about love, okay? Love. Which doesn't mean you always have to agree with everyone, but you can love someone and not agree with them. Because these theological differences, they do matter, okay? Not all disagreements are merely semantical, cultural. Some of them are, some of them aren't. But we must discern between what's essential and where there are things that differ. Because we agree on so much more than we disagree on. And there's a silver lining in these conflicts. And that silver lining is that every time this happens, every time there's one of these conflicts, it usually ends up in the benefit of the church in the long run. When I was talking about Athanasius, the whole controversy around him during his time led to the Nicene Creed, which then became the Orthodox Creed, which many of us know. We believe in one God, God the Father, Panchkarator, created heaven and earth, all things seen and unseen. When you had the issues with Nestorius and with St. Cyril, this put us in a position where we now have a much better defined understanding of Christology, which we didn't have before. And so that's what I meant when I said that theology is being revealed to us more and more through time. And they're often revealed through these controversies. And so these moments compel us till this very day, and especially nowadays, to open up the old theology book, to open up the church fathers and see what were they talking about? What were they saying? We reference them. And we're compelled to do that because of these controversies that we're now engaged in. And that's good to go back and to learn about our tradition and study it is good. And so there's unity in our core beliefs. And we need to really emphasize that more than we currently are. And we need to have charity in our differences. Charity doesn't mean tolerance, false teaching, understanding. But we need to have charity. And the true Christian, he doesn't stand on perfect leaders. There's never been perfect leaders. But we stand on the perfect cornerstone, Jesus. The perfect cornerstone. And when shepherds war, we remember who the good shepherd is.